It's my distinct honor to introduce the second keynote speaker of today, Chris Viehbacher, President, the Chief Executive Officer, and member of the Board of Directors of Biogen, a multinational biotechnology company and a world leader in neuroscience and neurological diseases. But as you'll hear this morning, and I'm not stealing the thunder, soon to become a leader in immunology. I first met Chris exactly 10 years ago when our company, Kite, was on the verge of an IPO. In May 2014, Chris was CEO of Sanofi. He and his president of global R&D, Elias Zerhouni, made a special trip from Paris to persuade us to drop our plans for a public offering. It was 2 months before the IPO, and instead be acquired by Sanofi. Despite this charisma and wit and shared vision of commitment to cell therapy and innovation, fortunately for the thousands of people at Kite, as you heard today, 4,000, and the burgeoning biotech industry in Los Angeles, and I highlight fortunately, that deal did not materialize. However, what materialized was the beginning of a friendship with Chris, which I value very much. Few people in our industry have profoundly impacted patient care and healthcare industry more than Chris. Chris has an illustrious career in pharmaceutical and the bio world, including GSK, 20 years at GSK, where he traveled between Germany, Canada, and France, then to the US as president of GSK North America. In 2008, Chris joined Sanofi, a Fortune 50 biopharmaceutical company based in Paris, as CEO and member of the board of directors. Chris diversifies Sanofi product portfolio from just the local European base to emerging market, emphasizing the world of diabetes. And his most notable achievement was acquiring a rare disease and multiple sclerosis company, Genzyme, in 2011 for $20 billion. Over the course of the tenure at Sanofi, his strategic moves positioned the company to a dramatic growth and transformed the company. Before joining Biogen, Chris enjoyed a successful career as a venture capitalist, where he founded Gurnett Point Capital. The Cambridge-based healthcare investment fund has led the creation and continuing development of many startup companies and innovative and entrepreneurial companies in the country. These days, Chris Viehbacher has his hands full in laying out a new path for Biogen, and as he described it himself in a recent analyst call, a complete redesign of Biogen. And knowing him, he will fulfill his mission. From my perspective, there is nobody more qualified to lead ambitious effort and capitalize a booming era of biopharma innovation than Chris. So today, we are eager to hear Chris' vision for the strategic reorientation of Biogen. Finally, when I called Chris to invite him, describing the importance of this meeting and LA Best, he immediately accepted the invitation without even looking at his calendar. So I would like to personally thank Chris' wife for letting him come to LA while his family is enjoying a vacation in Paris. So please join me in welcoming a true leader and innovator, Mr. Chris Viehbacher.
Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction, Arie, and it really is a pleasure to be here. You know, last night, Arie and Rebecca hosted a wonderful dinner and had an opportunity to meet Dr. Michelson, for example. And, you know, one of the things about really great dinners is when you not only have excellent food for nutrition, but excellent food for thought. And I found myself thinking this morning as I woke up, what actually makes a successful ecosystem in biomedical research? Now, Ray gave us a few of the ingredients: world-class universities, world-class teaching hospitals, venture capital. And I would say those are necessary but not sufficient conditions. You know, when I was in Paris, CEO of Sanofi, the French government came and said, you know, we'd really like to see a vibrant research ecosystem here in Paris. And this was a typical act of government schizophrenia, right? Because on the one hand, you've got the French government complaining about the prices of drugs, but boy, we really want an awful lot more research to find more new drugs. And the fact that those two things are linked didn't seem to register. But anyway, being a good corporate citizen, I asked BCG to analyze the Boston-Cambridge ecosystem and how that might translate to Paris. And they did come up with a lot of the things that Ray said. And, you know, while we made some progress, I think you would still see Paris as the city of light, city of love, city of culture and history, city of fashion, but it ain't going to challenge any one of our ecosystems in biomedical research. And I said, well, why was that? Why can LA succeed where Paris didn't? And that panel you just saw is exactly the reason, because I think the missing ingredient, yes, you need those world-class institutions, and yes, you need venture capital, but you need community leaders who feel a strong passion to have impact, a positive impact on the healthcare and well-being of those who suffer from disease. And you saw people who have achieved enormous scientific and medical success and who are putting their own money back into the system to make sure that all of the barriers, the bureaucracy, and everything else we know that slows down innovation are lifted. And so I have to say, I've come away after dinner last night and listening to this panel, I come away with a great confidence that LA and UCLA is going to continue to succeed as a world-class ecosystem. Now, Mark, I think we are one of those friends from somewhere else. We are not yet part of this ecosystem. Biogen is a company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we actually have a few similarities to what Bob described about the founding of Amgen. We were founded by, among others, two Nobel Prize winners, Dr. Phil Sharp and Dr. Wally Gilbert, back in 1978. And actually, Phil Sharp had been involved with advising on the creation of a San Francisco area company that you may have heard of called Genentech. And they came away thinking, well, we need one of those on the East Coast. And so they decided they were going to set this up in Cambridge. And to give some credence to your second theory, Bob, there are actually headlines from the Boston Globe of that time period with the words Frankenstein medicine in there. And it caused so much problem because they were also afraid of what might escape from our facilities. And it caused so much problem that we actually ended up founding the company in Geneva, Switzerland. And so Biogen is actually bio and Geneva, and that is where Biogen comes from. And it took a couple of years, but actually then the city elders did realize that actually this wasn't so dangerous after all and might even be good for business. And they changed their tune. And of course, now today, Boston, Cambridge is probably the preeminent ecosystem for biomedical research today. But it also shows what kind of determination and perseverance you need to make these things happen. And again, I come back to that takes leadership, and I think that's what you saw on stage this morning. So we were founded in 1978. It took 15 years before the first medicine, Avonex, for multiple sclerosis was launched. And that's another thing that people tend to forget, how long it can take to get a new medicine. You know, Arie talked about the best deal he never did, which was, you know, when we offered to actually fund Kite. But you know, and before I'd sat down with Arie and Rebecca actually in their home 10 years ago. I'd spent a Saturday with Steve Rosenberg at the National Cancer Institute, and he gave me kind of a private tutorial on cancer immune therapy. And you know, Steve was on the front cover of Time magazine in 1976. And that's how long it can take. The other night I was at a STAT event, and I met someone named Lotte Knudsen, who is at Novo Nordisk and who has been working on GLP-1s since 1986. So, you know, this is the commitment that it does take over many years and many dollars, and the passion and resilience of scientists to really bring an idea to a therapy for patients. And that was the case with Biogen. And in fact, for the last 45 years, we have pretty much been a multiple sclerosis company. After Avonex came Tysabri, came Tecfidera, Vumerity. But one of the problems of our industry is that you have to reinvent yourself all the time. You know, I did this interview last year with Stat, and I said, we're not in the Twinkie business. And I said, we're not in the Twinkie business because the company that makes Twinkies, and which doesn't do very much for your health either, by the way, had just been sold for $3.5 billion. I said, you know, I can remember as a kid, you know, Twinkies, and the product really hasn't changed, and they're still selling it, and they can still keep selling it, and they're probably still going to be Twinkies in another 30 years. We're not like that. We get on average maybe 10 or 12 years, and then that is the end of our run in this business. We can sometimes spend more time developing a new drug than we actually have time on the marketplace. And so that requires an adaptability and change constantly. So as we have seen now, our franchise in multiple sclerosis is coming to an end. There are other competitors out there, both biosimilars as well as other therapies. And so we have to pivot. And we've started to do that. We have 4 first-in-class new medicines that were all launched last year. And one of the things that you have to understand about Biogen, and I think there's also some similarities with Amgen, and you know, last night at dinner actually we were asked, why do Bob and I still say we're biotechs? You know, Bob has managed to, through outstanding leadership, create a company that has a bigger market cap than Pfizer. So why isn't Bob a big pharma? And I think it because at the root of our companies is still science, and the way we operate, we're still trying to be more nimble. You know, the large pharmaceutical companies, and I grew up in that world, we tend to be a lot more commercially focused. And in fact, I would argue for big pharma, the only real advantage to size is being able to commercialize products on a global scale. So we still think of ourselves as biotech companies. And one of the things about Biogen is there is an unbelievable passion about really trying to tackle the hardest problems in medicine that you can think of. And they're all neurological or neuroscience applications. And they're hard because we're talking about the brain, which is still, you know, if you were looking at a map, 200 years ago and you had those uncharted territories where explorers hadn't gone, well, that's what the brain is still. And we can't look at the brain like we can other parts of the body. And for a lot of the diseases that we are addressing, ALS, Parkinson's, Huntington's, Alzheimer's, these are all diseases where we don't really fully understand the underlying biology. But even if it's tough, if it's hard, that is exactly what Biogen will want to do. And it's all of these 4 products that we launched are breakthrough medicines. Just to give you an idea what they are, Qalsody is the first one I'll mention. This is a treatment for ALS. We don't really understand what causes most forms of ALS, but there is a hereditary form, and they have this SOD1, the SOD1 gene. And these folks can show you a family tree and will say, Aunt Mary and Uncle Fred died, my grandparents died. And it's truly tragic. And we witnessed that actually at the advisory committee for this. Well, we can affect that gene, and we can actually change the outcomes. In fact, during the clinical trials, we actually had to get physiotherapists to help people walk again because they were getting out of their wheelchairs. And you have to understand that normally ALS is a death sentence. You will die typically within 2 to 4 years. And in fact, a dear friend of mine just passed away from ALS, diagnosed in January, and passed away in May. And so to get people to reverse and to walk, I can tell you this is what we all get out of bed for in the morning. And we are getting news clips from as far away as New Zealand, where a young father of 3 children has to be carried into a treatment center and walks out under his own power. Now, there are 300 patients in the United States. There are 1,000 in Europe. We can never charge enough to make that money back. But this is what Biogen does. And in so doing, by the way, we validated neurofilament as a biomarker. And so everyone else who is doing research now in ALS can determine at a much earlier stage whether their treatment is actually working or not. And that's what really drives Biogen. We launched the first product for postpartum depression. Roughly 500,000 women suffer from this condition. Sadly, only about 80,000 are ever diagnosed and treated. And this is a devastating disease because there should be nothing better than the joy of creating a family. And this terrible postpartum depression can intervene. And indeed, 2 years ago, there was a tragic set of circumstances where a young mother who was a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital killed all 3 of her children and became a quadriplegic after she jumped out of a bedroom window trying to kill herself afterwards. Now, this is a mother who's at Mass General Hospital and hadn't actually been fully treated. And this is the first treatment that we can offer. Now, most antidepressants take 4 to 6 weeks to act. This one operates in 3 days. People are suddenly saying, I've gone from darkness for years within days to light again. And this will be a unique treatment. It is a 2-week treatment, and then you're done. It's not a chronic therapy. We're going to have to address a lot of the taboos that are around postpartum depression. There is no physician that actually sees themselves as accountable for the mother. Where does she turn to? Well, OBGYNs are trained to do surgery and to deliver babies, have not typically felt comfortable in diagnosing mental health. Getting in to see a psychiatrist can take you 9 months to get an appointment. And then there is a whole plethora of primary care physicians that may or may not treat this. So we have a small number of patients and a large number of prescribers, and we're having to innovate on how to launch that. Next one is Skyclarys. We acquired the company Reata last year. This is the very first treatment for Friedreich's ataxia. 5,000 patients in the United States. It normally hits young people at about age 13, 14, and is another neuromuscular degenerative disease. Basically lose muscle function over a time period. And by the time someone is in their early 30s, then of course it also affects the heart muscle, and they typically die of cardiac death. So we actually have the first treatment, and again, you see these young people who are now starting to be treated, and again, this is why we come to work in the morning. Now, the most significant drug we launched last year is Leqembi. This is the very first disease-modifying therapy for Alzheimer's disease. And again, Alzheimer's, sometimes people think of as, well, Granddad's just getting a little forgetful. That's not the case. Alzheimer's will kill you ultimately, and before it kills you, you will lose an awful lot of your physical function, ability to feed yourself, ability to toilet yourself, ability to look after yourself in general. And this becomes a significant burden for family members who have to help look after patients, who can also become quite violent with this disease. And so we have been able to demonstrate that if we can remove these amyloid plaques, that we can actually stop the cascade, the biochemical cascade that is essentially killing neurons and which is leading to the cognitive decline. We are also looking at a whole range of other modalities in Alzheimer's. We have the first medicine to go after tau. Basically, if you have Alzheimer's, you have two things. You have these amyloid plaques, and you have these things called tau tangles. And so we have an antisense oligonucleotide, an ASO, that will help knock down tau. And in fact, tau is really what will determine whether you have a severe or less severe Alzheimer's disease. And, Jane Grogan, who is a global head of research, is looking at other modalities. Can we look at ApoE4? Can we look at neuroinflammation? There's alpha-synuclein that's out there. So nobody is actually looking at so many modalities in Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's is going to be clearly a core focus of Biogen in the future. But coming into Biogen, I looked at this and said, boy, I've never seen a company this far out on the risk curve. Being in neuroscience is probably the most risky part of our industry for the reasons I outlined earlier. And one of the problems is that these diseases progress very slowly, which leads you to two things. The first is you can't really do a phase 2 study where you're trying to assess any kind of efficacy, because by the time you'd have to treat somebody to see efficacy, you might as well immediately go to the pivotal study. So we end up doing these phase 3 studies that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, take 5 to 7 years to do, and you have no idea whether they're going to work until you turn over the last card. So as I like to say, we have an awful lot in our pipeline that are moonshots, and it's hard to get comfortable knowing that everything you have in your pipeline is a moonshot, because you have investors out there who would like to know, have you got any kind of predictability that you're going to actually deliver some of these new medicines while some of your other products are declining? And so that led us to think strategically about where could we go next. And, how do you, essentially the problem is, how do we take a company that has unbelievable scientific and medical capability in a particular area and has been fairly narrowly focused for the 45 years of its life, and broaden the aperture a little bit? Because if you go too far, you're going to really move away not only from the expertise of the company, but really the identity of who Biogen is. And so we believe that we can move into rare diseases, but also immunology, because MS is essentially an autoimmune disease. So we have always been in immunology. And indeed, last year, I would say the trickiest decision I had to make was who to hire as a new head of global research. And there was an awful lot of pressure to go with another neuroscientist. And you can imagine, we already have a lot of neuroscientists. And if you're going to start doing something different, you need people to do it. And so I decided I needed an immunologist. And that's Jane, who spent a long part of her career at Genentech, developed, I think, the TIGIT technology. I think you once told me TIGIT is named after your daughter, Jane. And so that gives us an opportunity to move a little bit more into immunology. And yesterday, we announced the acquisition of human immunology HiBio, that gets us more into auto antibodies. And the initial indications are in rare kidney diseases, but actually you could develop this into other indications, and this could actually create some of the expertise and some of the critical mass to move more into immunology as we look forward. What is good news is that, actually where we are today, we are looking at a period of growth because most everything we have has been launched. But we do have to balance this need internally, but I'll talk about it externally and echo some of Bob's comments. We have a company that is fascinated by terrific science and really wants to go after these problems, but you also have to survive as a company. And so how do you balance that? And I have to say, the model I have in mind is Amgen. Because 10 years ago, there wasn't that much difference in size of the company. But under Bob's leadership, Amgen has raced ahead. And Bob has figured out how do you maintain great science, expand into different indications. I mean, you heard all the things that Amgen is in and has been successful at, and also created an awful lot of value for shareholders. And so that's what we're going to have to do over the next 10 years at Biogen. Now, just going back to the ecosystems. We all want these ecosystems. As much as we have done in the 40 years since I left university, I think about all of the amazing therapeutic advances. When I started in this business, I started with Welcome, and we were just launching AZT for HIV. And in those days, that felt like a pandemic. And hospitals were suddenly full of patients. Nobody knew how to treat them. And when one of my first jobs was actually projecting the revenue for AZT, and it was horrific when you looked at the infection rate and the death rate. And where are we today? 1 pill a day, not even now. And we can treat HIV as a chronic disease. We have not been successful yet at developing a vaccine. But you think about the advances in oncology. You think about all the advances in vaccines. But every one of you, I'm sure, knows somebody who still has an enormous unmet need in healthcare. So as much as we have done, there is still much to do. And that's why these ecosystems are so important, because this innovation is teamwork. It's not just the individual. It is people who are working together. We need academia. We need industry. We need the hospitals. We need the treating physicians to develop medicines. And that's why they're important. But as Bob said, that's under threat. And this is where we all need to come together. As long as I have been in this business, there has always been a tension between how do you make healthcare affordable and still be able to finance innovation. Now, I'd like to say that we could do innovation a lot cheaper, but I'll tell you, it only gets more expensive. All of these technologies we're talking about are expensive. And so I ask for your help. Everybody in this ecosystem needs to be an ambassador for innovation. We need to make sure we're informing public officials and elected officials of the importance of innovation, not only to healthcare, but to economics, because brain power is what makes countries competitive today. So we came with curiosity, and we look forward to coming back. We'd like to be able to be a part of this ecosystem. And again, Arie, thank you for the invitation to the organizers. Thank you also for inviting Biogen to be part of that. Thanks, everybody.